The first time my boots touched that Italian sand, I knew something was off. I was just 21 years old. The sea looked calm, the sky clear, like it was promising us a break. But deep in my chest I felt it, that quiet warning only soldiers understand. In war, anything that feels easy is usually a trap. My name's Thomas Gallagher, I'm 99 now, and I live in a small house on the edge of New Jersey. Every morning I start the same way, a strong cup of coffee and a few minutes sitting on the porch, listening to the wind coming off the Atlantic. That sound has been with me since I was a boy. But sometimes when I close my eyes, I don't hear the ocean calling me home anymore. I hear Anzio. There was a day, January 1944, when the sea was so still it looked like glass. And even then, I knew that silence was hiding something terrible. That calm, that beautiful lie, was the beginning of the toughest trap we'd ever fall into in Italy. And that's why I'm telling you this, my friend. Because every time I close my eyes, I can still see that Italian coastline, just as it was in January of 1944. When I close my eyes, I can still see that Italian shoreline, January 1944. The sea was so calm it looked like glass. The waves came in soft, whispering against our boots, like they wanted to touch us instead of drag us under. The sky had that soft winter gray that somehow quiets the heart, and the wind, cold but clean, felt almost gentle after months of smoke and gunpowder. Anyone stepping onto that beach without knowing what was coming would have sworn it was a place for rest, not for war. The hills rose softly, green even in the middle of winter. Far away, a few tile-roofed houses stood quietly, like civilian life was still untouched. For a brief, deceitful moment, we believed we were walking into a peaceful scene. I remember the guys stepping off the landing craft, some whistling, others joking nervously. One of them, a kid from Boston, looked at me and said, "If it stays this easy, we'll be in Rome by next week." He said it with such a bright smile that it hurt to look at him, because Rome felt so close, so real that we almost believed it. The water reached our knees as we waded ashore. Rifles wrapped in cloth, heavy packs on our backs, helmets bobbing with every wave. And strangely, no one shot at us. No machine gun fire from the cliffs. No artillery from inland. Just silence. A silence we mistook for luck. I'll never forget that feeling, my friend. That pounding in my chest, waiting for the first shot that never came. The sound of our boots sinking into the sand was the only thing we heard. And that calm, instead of bringing peace, filled us with a new kind of fear. Because in war, anything that feels easy is usually a trap. The first men to reach the shore knelt down, scooping up handfuls of sand as if trying to make sure it was real. The air smelled of salt, damp earth, alive and fertile. So different from the burnt metal scent of France or Africa. It almost smelled like home. And yet, beneath that sweetness, something dark pulsed, unspoken but there. I remember one soldier scribbling something on a crumpled sheet of paper the moment he stepped off the boat. I asked what he was doing and he said quietly, "Writing, I'm fine, just in case I don't make it long." His voice was steady but his hands were shaking. That contrast, I only understood it years later. The calm of the sea, and the trembling of men. It's as if nature itself knew how to hold its breath before hell opened. In the reports, they'll call it the Anzio landing, just another operation. But for us, that first morning was pure confusion. We expected gunfire, blood, chaos. Instead, we found empty beaches, thick silence, and a horizon that lied to us. A horizon that promised an easy path. The cruel part was believing it. Because that quiet wasn't peace. It was the beginning of the hardest trap we'd ever walk into in Italy. And even now, when I hear the sound of the sea, I don't think of vacations or rest. I think of Anzio. Of that quiet coast that welcomed us with open arms, only to close them like a prison soon after. If there's one thing we were fooled by that January of 1944, it was hope. The sunrise over Anzio felt different that morning, like it was carrying promises. The sun came up shyly, slipping through the clouds, painting the beach with a soft golden light. The reflections on the water looked like fire, not the fire of war but the fire of life. Our officers kept saying the road to Rome was open. A quick strike and we'll be there in a few days, they said. And the worst part is, we believed them. Many of us looked north, imagining the streets of the eternal city, the piazzas, the churches, the feeling of having survived something enormous just to reach a place that felt immortal. I remember one of my buddies, Michael, he'd barely seen Europe outside the battlefields. He smiled and said, "When we get to Rome, the first thing I'm gonna do is walk into a church and light a candle. Not for me, for my mom." Simple words, but they carried so much weight. I didn't answer, I just looked at him. Because I had my own small dreams too. A hot meal, a dry bed, a letter from home. Those little dreams, my friend, were what kept us standing. For a moment we felt invincible. Empty beaches, no gunfire, the calm sea, everything made us believe that, for once, luck was on our side. That maybe, the war was giving us a break. Some guys started humming songs from back home. Others wrote quick letters saying, "We're fine, we'll be in Rome soon." In every glance, every gesture, there was a spark of hope. Even the older soldiers, the ones who'd already seen too much, allowed themselves a brief smile. Because the human heart always clings to an illusion, even when it's only a mirage. I still remember an old Italian man walking slowly toward us from the edge of the beach. He held a small bottle of wine in his hand and whispered, "Benvenuti, forse la guerra finis presto." Welcome, maybe the war will end soon. That moment felt so human, so warm, that for a second we forgot where we were. We held on to that hope like shipwrecked men cling to a piece of wood in the middle of the sea. But the cruel thing about war, my friend, is that it always gives you a sip of hope before it twists the knife. That dawn in Anzio was full of illusions. We could almost touch Rome. We thought it would be quick, clean, victorious. We didn't know we were stepping into a mousetrap dressed as a promise. That was our sunrise, golden, hopeful, deeply human. A dawn I still carry in my heart. Because it was the last moment of light before the shadow closed in around us. For the first few days after the landing, we lived inside an illusion. The beach seemed calm, almost kind. Mornings came gray but peaceful, and the sea kept moving in that quiet rhythm that makes you forget danger for a moment. There were times when you could almost believe the war had ended. You'd see men washing their uniforms in the salt water, writing letters, sharing cigarettes. The sound of hammers from the engineers mixed with laughter, with voices talking about home, about girls, about going back someday. It felt impossible to think that hell was waiting just beyond those hills. I remember looking around and thinking, maybe this time will be different. Maybe this was where the war would finally get tired of itself. The officers walked among us with calm confidence, talking about progress, about plans, about Rome. So close we could almost picture it. Just a few more days, they said, and we'll be drinking Italian wine. And we believed them. Because the heart needs something to hold on to when fear goes quiet for too long. At sunset, the sky would turn copper, and the sea would glow as if the world were burning. But it wasn't fire, not yet. It was something beautiful and uneasy, like the earth itself was holding its breath. I still remember the voice of an old sergeant, a veteran from Africa, leaning close and whispering, "Too quiet, kid. I don't like it." He was right. But none of us wanted to hear it. We preferred to believe the calm would last. That the enemy had retreated. That maybe, for once, the war had surrendered before we did. At night, some of the men sang softly. Others slept on the warm sand, staring at the sky as if every star was a promise. I did the same. I closed my eyes and for a moment, I swore I could hear the silence of victory. But that silence, it wasn't peace. It was the sound a predator makes before it leaps. Now, all these years later, I understand something. Those calm days were the most dangerous of all. Because they made us believe. Because in every laugh, every fire we lit at night, the enemy crept one step closer. My friend, sometimes the perfect trap doesn't feel like a trap at all. It feels like rest. Like a deep breath right before the blow. And that's what Anzio was in those first days. A beautiful illusion, fragile and gentle, wrapping us in its arms. Just before it tore us apart. My friend, when the landing went so smoothly, our first thought was, let's hold the line. And we did, with everything we had. In just a few days, the beaches of Anzio turned into an improvised fortress. Deep trenches carved into the sand, stacks of sandbags, rolls of barbed wire stretched across the shore. The engineers worked around the clock, the gunners positioned their cannons toward the hills, and the medics set up 8 stations right there on the beach. It looked like a small, invincible city, a steel stronghold facing the sea. I remember some of the officers walking around with that proud look, nodding at the defenses and saying, "Nothing's getting through here." And we believed them. Tired but obedient, we let ourselves fall into that sense of safety. After all, we had the ships behind us, the heavy artillery, thousands of well-equipped men. How could we not feel safe? But, my friend, war has a cruel way of punishing confidence. While we built walls and dug trenches, we didn't realize we were building our own prison. Every shovelful of sand, every bag we stacked, was another brick in the trap the Germans were quietly setting for us. I still remember those early days. The guard rotations, the makeshift kitchens, the smell of smoke drifting up from small campfires by the sea. Some soldiers even started fishing, convinced that maybe, just maybe, the war was finally giving us a break. There were laughs again, letters going home by the handful, and more than one man wrote, "Everything's quiet here." I thought the same myself. One afternoon I lay back on the sand, watching the gray sky, and told myself, maybe this time will be different. But deep down something kept me uneasy. The silence in those hills was too thick, too deliberate. It felt like the wolves were letting us build the fence, just so they could surround it later. And that's exactly what happened. What we called a fortress was, in truth, a cage. A fortress on the beach that soon became the perfect target. On the maps, Anzio looked like a brilliant advance. But in our skin, in our hearts, it felt more and more like a dead end. The place where the sea stood at our backs. And the enemy, silent and waiting, had already closed in ahead. The calm didn't last long. One morning, just when some of us were starting to believe the war had forgotten about us on that quiet beach, we heard it. That sound. Not engines. Not boots. Something deeper. A long, low whistle slicing through the air. And then, the explosion. The ground shook beneath our feet. Sand flew everywhere, like some invisible hand had ripped pieces of the beach right out of the earth. The sandbags we'd stacked with such effort just days before disintegrated in seconds. Men hit the ground, covered in dust and blood, too stunned to understand where it was coming from. The Germans had waited, patiently, cruelly. They let us get comfortable, let us believe we owned Anzio. And then, from those hills, they unleashed hell. Shells. Mortars. Heavy guns. Every blast tore straight through the illusion of safety we'd built. I'll never forget Jack. He was heating up coffee in a small tin can when it happened. Just one of those tiny, ordinary moments that make you forget where you are for a second. Then came the blast. When the smoke cleared, there was no coffee, no Jack. Just a smoking crater in the sand where he'd been sitting. That's how fast everything changed. The air filled with screams, shouted orders, men crying for medics. The beach, that quiet, makeshift camp we'd built, became hell on earth in seconds. We ran like rats under constant fire, no cover, nowhere safe to go. The ships tried to return fire from offshore, but the enemy had the high ground, the hills, the range, the advantage. And, my friend, that was the first time I truly understood we weren't marching to Rome. Not easily. Maybe not at all. The roar of those German guns wasn't just an attack. It was a message. You're not leaving here. This is where you'll die. And even as we fought back, even as we dug deeper and screamed our defiance into the wind, something inside us shifted. That golden hope from the dawn before, it started to darken. Because that morning the Germans didn't just answer our landing. They closed the trap. Anzio had begun to show its true face. Not a gateway to Rome, but a graveyard by the sea. What came next, my friend, was the worst of it all. The moment we realized we were trapped. The Germans had closed the circle. From the hills and nearby villages, they began tightening the noose, slowly, deliberately, like wolves circling their prey. We could feel their eyes on us. Their cannons trained on every inch of our position. And with the sea at our backs, there was nowhere left to go. That beachhead, the one that had once felt like a victory, had turned into a prison. A cage of sand, mud, and barbed wire. Every attempt to push inland met a storm of crossfire. Every move toward the flanks was cut down by ferocious counterattacks. And retreat meant admitting defeat and diving straight into the sea. The trenches became our home, and our grave in waiting. They were shallow, waterlogged ditches where the mud mixed with blood. We slept there, ate there, trembled there every time an artillery shell landed too close. It felt like living underground, waiting for the ceiling to cave in at any moment. Nights were the hardest. We couldn't even light a fire. The smallest flicker of flame could draw enemy fire within seconds. We moved in darkness, crawling through the mud, barely breathing. The sound of a single boot sinking into the wet ground was enough to set every nerve on edge. One night, a young soldier next to me whispered, "I don't think we're fighting anymore. I think we're just waiting to die." I didn't have an answer for him, because deep down I felt the same. Yes, we were still resisting. We still manned the lines, still loaded the guns, still answered every order. But each day felt borrowed, like time itself was on loan, and the debt could be collected at any moment. The siege of Anzio wasn't just military. It was psychological. Each man who sat in those trenches knew that death didn't need an invitation. It could come as a stray bullet, a misplaced shell, or a sudden collapse of the earth that buried you alive. There was no escape, no pause, no mercy. Anzio wasn't a battle that moved forward. It was a slow, suffocating trap where every minute of survival felt like an eternity. And I still remember, looking toward the horizon and seeing Rome out there, so close you could almost imagine the bells ringing in the distance. And yet knowing with every fiber of your being that you'd never reach it. Because the truth of Anzio wasn't the fight. It was the waiting. The endless waiting, between one heartbeat and the next, wondering if it would be your last. My friend, if I close my eyes I can still hear that sky. It wasn't blue. It wasn't gray. It wasn't even a sky anymore. It was a mouth of fire, open above our heads. The Germans rained down artillery without mercy. By day the shells fell one after another, lifting walls of sand and dirt that swallowed men whole. By night the heavens lit up like midday, not with sunlight but with explosions. Each flash was a man-made lightning strike, each blast a thunder that shook us to our bones. There was no safe place. No trench deep enough, no sandbag wall thick enough, no tunnel strong enough to make you feel safe. Every hit made the ground quake under our boots. It felt like the earth itself wanted to throw us out. Sleep? Impossible. Rest? A forgotten luxury. I remember one night in particular. The shelling was so intense that the ground vibrated like a drum beneath our bodies. Men prayed, shouted, clutched photographs to their chests. One of them, just a boy barely 20, grabbed my arm and said, "Promise me, if I don't make it, write to my father." Before I could answer, a shell landed so close that it buried us halfway in dirt. When I dug myself out, he was gone. No scream. No trace. Just that awful silence that follows destruction, a silence heavier than the noise itself. But the sound, my friend, the sound was the worst. It wasn't just the explosions. It was the whistle before impact, that single, endless second when you knew the shell was coming, and there was absolutely nothing you could do. That whistle still lives inside my nightmares. Sometimes, in the quietest hours of the night, I wake up thinking it's coming again. The Allied ships fired back from the sea, turning the entire coastline into a storm of echoes and rage. There was no sense of direction, only chaos. Each explosion felt like a monster born out of fire, devouring everything in its path. Living under the bombs wasn't living. It was surviving with your jaw clenched, your heart racing, and your soul praying that the next shell wouldn't have your name on it. The sky, that calm, beautiful sky that had once promised hope, had become our cruelest enemy, because we no longer looked up searching for light. We looked up waiting for the next hit. And when you've lived like that, when every breath feels borrowed and every heartbeat could be your last, you stop being afraid of death. You start being afraid of time, of how long you'll have to keep living through it. My friend, if you really want to understand what Anzio was, don't think of big offensives or maps spread out on generals' tables. Think of mud. Mud up to your knees. Mud in your clothes, in your food, in your soul. The trenches were nothing more than ditches filled with freezing water. We slept on wooden boards laid across the muck, wrapped in damp blankets that couldn't keep out the cold. Every time it rained, and it rained often, the trenches turned into vast puddles where rats and men shared the same narrow space. Some nights I woke up with the feeling that the mud was swallowing me inch by inch. Food was scarce and always cold. Canned meat, hard bread that could break your teeth, coffee that tasted more like water than hope. Sometimes you had to choose between eating with mud or not eating at all. And still, that little piece of bread shared between 2 or 3 men tasted like heaven. Because in that hunger, sharing became the only act of defiance we had left. I remember a soldier who found an apple in the pocket of a dead farmer. He cut it into 4 pieces and passed them around as if it were a feast. The juice stung our tongues, sour, sharp, but for a few seconds we felt alive again. For that moment, the war hadn't stolen everything from us. The cold was another enemy. The sea wind slipped through every gap, and our wet uniforms hung heavy on our bodies like chains. Many men coughed day and night, sick with nothing to cure them. Fever mixed with exhaustion, and some simply didn't wake up one morning. Not because of bullets, but because their bodies had finally given up. And yet, my friend, inside that trap we learned to hold on to the smallest things. A letter from home that somehow made it through. A photo folded 4 times, passed from hand to hand like a sacred relic. The faint warmth of a cigarette, shared by 3 men under one helmet, trying to stay dry under the same patch of sky. Those small gestures, that fragile humanity, kept us alive even when we were half buried in misery. Anzio wasn't just bombs and fire. It was mud and cold and hunger and a silence so heavy it pressed against your chest. It was the daily ritual of surviving one more day, even when every sunrise felt like a dare from fate itself. And sometimes I still ask myself, my friend, how did we do it? How did we hold on inside that trap, that corner of the world where life felt farther away than Rome itself? Maybe it wasn't strength. Maybe it was something smaller, stubbornness, love, or the simple refusal to let the world forget we were still human. My friend, when I think back to Anzio, the pain that lingers isn't from the bombs or the hunger. It's from the faces that never came back. The ones nobody talks about. The anonymous sacrifices. The men who died without medals, without speeches, but who held the line with their blood so the rest of us could live. I remember one desperate dawn, gray cold, when the Germans tried to break through our front. A group of 20 of our boys ran out to stop them, fully knowing they'd probably never return. I saw them go, their silhouettes lit by the flash of artillery fire. I saw them fall one after another. And yet, they stopped the advance long enough for us to hold the position. No newspaper ever printed their names. No monument was built in their honor. But I keep them here, in my memory, as the invisible heroes of that cursed beach. There were smaller acts too, quiet ones that no one ever saw. A soldier who crawled out of his trench under machine gun fire to drag a wounded man to safety. Another who threw himself over a grenade to save the 3 men beside him. Or the one who ran out of bullets and still charged with a bayonet against impossible odds. Stories that never made it into the books, but were greater than any general strategy. I'll never forget Thomas, just 19 years old. Before a suicide mission to cover our retreat, he showed me a photo of his girl. He said, "If I make it back, I'm going to ask her to marry me." He never made it back. I found that photo later, folded, muddy, torn, still tucked in his pocket after the battle. I kept it for years, like a quiet promise I didn't want the world to forget. That's the cruelty of war, my friend. People remember the numbers, so many dead at Anzio, as if they were just statistics on a page. But behind every number was a face, a dream, a broken promise. And every single one of them deserves to be remembered. Because Anzio wasn't just a battle. It was an altar of anonymous sacrifice. A place where men died without glory, but with the greatest kind of courage. The courage to give everything for the man beside them. And me, I survived. And because I did, I carry a debt that no time can erase. That's why I tell you these stories, my friend. so that their invisible names won't vanish into the silence of history. If there's something that kills slower than bullets, it's time. At Anzio, the days turned into an invisible prison. The front didn't move. The hills stayed in German hands. And we were stuck there, trapped between the sea and the fire. Hours crawled by as if the clock itself had given up. The routine never changed. Stand guard, stay low, duck when the shells came, clean the rifle, try to sleep in the mud. And every day felt exactly like the one before it, until you couldn't tell if it was Monday or Thursday or Sunday anymore. It was like living in a loop, a never-ending weight that slowly ate away at your soul. The worst part wasn't the fear. It was not knowing. Not knowing if tomorrow we'd be ordered to move forward, or if we'd stay there for weeks, months, maybe forever. That uncertainty broke men from the inside out. Some started talking to themselves. Others wrote the same letter over and over, as if repeating the words could hold their sanity together. And some just stopped talking at all. They'd sit there staring into nothing, their eyes empty, as if part of them had already left that beach. I remember one man, Samuel. Every morning he'd ask, "Are we moving out today?" And every evening when the answer was no, I could see him sink a little deeper inside himself. One day he stopped asking. He just looked at the ground, quiet, like a man who'd run out of hope. Nights were the hardest. Between bombardments, the silence pressed down on us like weight. Some tried to sleep by telling stories about home. Their kids, their sweethearts, the smell of their streets back in Ohio or New York. Others just smoked in silence, eyes lost in the dark, waiting for dawn to bring something. Anything. But every dawn looked the same. Mud, cold, and the echo of distant guns. It was like waking up inside the same nightmare, again and again. That weight, my friend, was a war within the war. Not against the enemy in front of us, but against the one inside. Against fear. Against hopelessness. Against the quiet truth that life was moving on somewhere far away, while we were still sinking in that endless swamp. Anzio wasn't just a battlefield. It was a wound that refused to heal. A place where time itself stopped. And we learned that survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about not letting time erase who you are. And when I think back now, that's what hurts the most. Not the bombs, not the bullets, but the long wait. The feeling that the world kept turning without us. After so long trapped in that pit, there came a day when hell finally opened a door. It didn't happen suddenly, no heroic music, no grand victory like in the movies. It was slow. It was bloody. It was painful. But it was the way out. The orders were clear. Advance, break the line, open the road to Rome. Many of us hesitated. After months buried in mud and fear, we wondered if we had any strength left at all. Our bodies were exhausted. But our souls were burning to get out of that prison of sand. I remember that first day of the attack. The sky was thick with smoke, and the ground shook under the weight of Allied artillery preparing the breakthrough. The noise was deafening. But somewhere inside that thunder, a spark appeared. Hope. Men looked at each other, and for the first time in months I saw smiles. Tired smiles covered in dirt and ash, but real smiles. The kind that come from remembering you're still alive. We moved forward, step by step, our hearts pounding with every stride. Bullets whistled. Shells exploded around us. But every inch gained felt like a victory carved out of hell. I saw a friend fall beside me, and somehow his fall pushed us forward even harder. It felt as if all the men who had died in the mud of Anzio were behind us, shouting, "Go. Keep moving. Don't die here." And then we broke through. The moment we crossed the German line was beyond words. It was like breathing after months of drowning. The air smelled of gunpowder, but also of freedom. A soldier next to me dropped to his knees, kissed the dry earth, and cried out, "We're alive. God damn it, we're alive." I'll never forget those tears. They weren't tears of joy alone. They were a mix of rage, relief, and grief for all the ones who didn't make it out. Because the truth is, not everyone escaped that hell. Many stayed behind in those trenches, under the mud, under the fire. Men who dreamed of Rome and never saw its walls. And that truth, that emptiness, weighed heavier than victory itself. When we finally moved inland, silence began to return. But it wasn't the same silence as before. It wasn't the silence of a trap. It was the silence of hearts learning how to breathe again. The sun shone over the Italian fields, and for a moment it almost felt like life had come back. But deep inside I knew the truth. Nothing would ever be the same. The escape from Anzio was like waking from a nightmare, only to find that the nightmare had left scars on every one of us. Yes, we got out, but every step forward carried the weight of those who didn't. That was our real victory. Not the kind that earns medals or headlines, but the simple human triumph of still being able to breathe. Because leaving hell behind doesn't mean you've won. It only means you've survived. And in war, my friend, even when you win, you lose too much, my friend. Now that the years have passed, I've come to understand something. Anzio wasn't a victory and it wasn't a defeat. It was a wound. A wound carved into the Italian soil, and into the hearts of the men who lived through it. The books say that landing was a step toward Rome. And yes, we reached the eternal city in the end. But the pages don't tell you what we left behind. Thousands of bodies sunk into the mud. Dreams that never woke. Letters that never reached home. You won't find that on any map. That's something only we carry, etched into our memory like scars. Anzio taught me that war isn't measured by the land you gain, but by the lives you lose. That every single yard of ground can cost 100 men. And that, in the end, what remains isn't glory, but the silence of those who never came back. I've returned to Italy over the years. I've walked those beaches again. I've seen tourists basking in the sun, children laughing, building sandcastles, where we once buried our brothers. And I thought, how fragile memory is, how easily time covers over what was once hell. The sea is still there, calm and beautiful, as if it never saw blood. But I know the truth. I carry it with me. Anzio was a trap, yes, but it was also an altar of resistance. Because even when everything was against us, the mud, the hunger, the fire, we kept breathing. We kept holding on to life. That's the real legacy of Anzio. The stubbornness of humanity standing at the edge of the abyss. My friend, as long as my voice still lives, I'll keep telling you these stories. Because the names of my comrades must not drown in silence. Because every sacrifice deserves to be remembered, not as a number on a list, but as a human heartbeat that stopped too soon. And if you ever walk along the beaches of Anzio, listen closely. Between the soft waves and the whisper of the sea breeze, you can still hear them. They don't ask for glory. They don't ask for revenge. They only ask for memory. Never forget, my friend. That is the true lesson of Anzio. My friend, this was the story of Anzio, the beach that welcomed us in silence, and ended up becoming a trap of mud, fire, and ghosts. There, young men were left behind. Promises were broken. Letters never reached home. And we learned that war isn't always about winning ground. Sometimes it's just about surviving. I saw it. I felt it on my skin. And even though the sea looks calm today, I can still hear the echo of the shells, still feel the chill of the mud in my bones. That's why I tell you this story. Because as long as someone listens, they're still alive. In memory, in voice, in the spaces between silence. And I promise you something, my friend. This won't be the last story. There will be more voices from the past. More memories of battles almost forgotten, but still beating quietly inside those of us who survived. Because every story deserves to be told, not as a number in a book, but as a human whisper that crosses through time. My friend, as long as my voice still breathes, I'll keep telling you these stories, so that we never forget, so that the echo of Anzio doesn't fade into history, but keeps resounding like an eternal reminder in the waves of the sea.